What is up, fight fans? Welcome to the MMA Plug presented to you by Mile High Sports. I'm your host, Jordan Kurtz. You can give me a follow along online at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. Make sure that you smash that like, share, and subscribe button for all platforms possible here at the Mile High Sports Network. Want to give a shout out to the crew here. They are doing incredible things all across the board. Football season in Colorado may be over. CU, the program may be in the off season at this stage, but the coverage certainly is not going to stop. You have a couple of potential top 5, dare I say top 3 draft picks coming out of CU. So there's going to be tons of headlines coming from Coach Prime and crew going forward. The Broncos just got eliminated. So I guess personally I say go Lions at this stage. Motor City Dan Campbell, I'm pulling for you. Go biting kneecaps all along the way as much as you possibly can. Winter sports are in full swing. College basketball, NHL, NBA. Make sure that you check them out all across the board, wherever possible. The magazine, online, podcast side of things, YouTube, wherever possible. Again, follow, smash that like, share, and subscribe button for the Mile High Sports Network. Guys, as far as the Colorado scene coming up, there is about to be a full slate of events coming up, starting with this weekend. There are going to be a couple of shows happening at the Eclipse Event Center for Sparta Sports and Entertainment. If you can, get your tickets from the fighters directly. I know that it's going to be the last couple of days for them, if any of them have physical copies. Otherwise, it's going to be all digital point of sale. Use that promo code or the drop down for the fighter, whatever is applicable for their sales system. It's definitely going to help them in that regard and for any of the fighters on these shows that we're about to mention here. And we'll talk a little bit more about these show or about each of these cards respectively later on in the program. But Friday night is Strikers Night. Going to be some squared circle action happening. And then Saturday night will be Caged Violence. MMA fights going down at the Eclipse Event Center this weekend. February 8th at the Stampede, you have CJJC, Colorado Jiu-Jitsu Club 24, kicking off this year's season. You have a variety of competitors from early debutantes all the way through experienced pro grapplers that are going to be on this show. It's a tremendous atmosphere to be a part of out there at the Stampede. If you have the chance, come out, check it out. It's going to be a matinee full of exciting matches of grappling inside of the cage. A couple of weeks following from that, there are going to be 2 shows on the Front Range going down on March 1st. You have Colorado Combat Club making their return on March 1st at Stampede. There is going to be 5 pro fights on the card, along with a slate of elimination bouts. You have Battle MMA Championships happening on March 1st at the Norris Penrose Event Center in Colorado Springs. Again, there's going to be a few pro fights on that card, as well as a slate of elimination bouts there. No shortage of action for you to be able to sink your teeth into for the combat sports world here in the next few weeks coming up. We would love to see your faces out there in support of these events. You coming out and showing your support in person or by purchasing those pay-per-view streams. That allows us to be able to continue to throw these events. And if nothing else, the shares, the engagements on social media, anything that you could do there, it all helps. So we are grateful and we appreciate your continued support here in our already bountiful Colorado combative sports community. Now, transitioning to the weekend recap, we had the first card of the year for the UFC happening this last week, and it went down at the Capitol back in Las Vegas at the Apex. This was a fight night that started the year off with a bang. There were all the naysayers naturally going into fight week saying, oh, you're starting the year off with a dud, with a B-list card. I don't understand where that comes from, because on paper, there were a lot of great fights and they delivered. Let's talk about a few of the matchups here real quick. First off, in the main event, this was a rematch between 2 of the best ladies on the planet. You have a jiu-jitsu black belt taking on a judo black belt. You have history between the 2 of them. As mentioned, there was already a fight a couple of years back. I believe that was 2019 on the date from the original one. You had number 6, Mackenzie Dern, taking on number 8, Amanda Ribas. Amanda Ribas got the best of Mackenzie Dern in that first outing. Mackenzie said there was a litany of circumstances surrounded with that first fight. That was her first fight that she took after having her daughter Moa. There were postpartum issues, so on and so forth that she cited. Well, I mean, you could say anything, but at the end of the day, she did take the fight. She made the walk, and Amanda got her the first time. This time, Mackenzie was able to pull off her signature armbar submission victory with only a couple of seconds left on the clock in that third round. Maybe this sets up a rubber match down the way. Who knows if their paths are destined to meet once again in the future. We talked about it though last week. There is a very noticeable difference in Mackenzie's game when she's working with Jason Perillo versus when she's not. She's back working with Jason, and it was evident. She is just a much more composed and put together fighter. Her striking is so much more crisp and calculated versus a throw caution to the wind and brawl or be defensive by being offensive type of approach. She was just much more measured and calculated. And in this fight, I think that all the way around that played into her advantage. Amanda Hebus, though, is still, without a doubt, one of the best ladies on the planet in that division. And at one point in time, Mackenzie was, when she was first thrust into the spotlight, as she mentioned in the promo reel, she was thought of as, oh, this is going to be the next Ronda. This is a potential title hope. Well, she does have all of those accolades, and she does have the resume in the grappling world that she does for a reason. She is legit. She just doesn't have a couple of the pieces like the polished striking or maybe some of the offensive wrestling to get her down to the ground if the striking doesn't happen. But in this situation, they end up down on the canvas, and if you get down there on the canvas in an MMA match at this stage, that's a tough world to be with Mackenzie Dern, especially given you allow for her to have any of those armbar opportunities open up. It's a tough night for anybody out there. And Amanda Hebus, again, is one of the best out there. But Mackenzie Dern's skill set was on full display the other night, and she inches herself back toward title contention with a victory there. In the co-main event, you had a victory with Santiago Ponzinibbio, the old dog, the Argentine dagger, pulling it off against Carlston Harris. Harris, you thought, was maybe going to run away with this in the beginning portion of the fight, but he ran out of gas. He had Santiago hurt. He dropped him a couple of times. I mean, it was all of a you-know-what hair's difference of him putting him out versus it being he just has enough life to keep on fighting, to just keep on surviving. And that vet pulled out some vet tricks to be able to weather the turbulent waters and was eventually able to get his offense going and was able to pull off the finish against Carlston Harris. I mean, Harris, you have to feel for the guy because he put everything he had into that fight, and he all but had Ponzinibbio finished. I mean, certain referees might have stopped it at a couple of points after Ponzinibbio getting dropped a couple of times. I credit the referee in this contest for not stopping the fight because, as noted, Ponzinibbio was still there. He was still intelligently defending himself enough to the point to where he was able to rally through and then gather his wits about him to pull off the victory. I think that when we saw some of the replays or when they broke it down with the individual frames, one thing that's important to note with Ponzinibbio, even when he got dropped, his eyes maintained contact. He was still present. He was still aware of exactly where the threat was coming from, as opposed to sometimes when you see somebody get dropped, they get flashed in the process. You see their eyes roll back. You see them maybe for a second have a look of bewilderment of what's going on or just throwing hands up or fencing to defend themselves just because they know that they're in danger but don't know where it's coming from. I don't believe that that was the case really that we saw in a couple of the really bad moments for Santiago. I believe that Santiago was rocked. He was hurt, but he wasn't compromised to the point to where he was no longer capable of what? Intelligent defense. Moving on from that, you had a matchup between Cesar Almeida taking on Abdul Razak Al Hassan. We said this going into the fight that there was fireworks written all over this, that Abdul Razak Al Hassan, he is all gas, no brakes. All of his wins are all by finish, and they all come early. He had a lot of frustration coming into this fight from his last two, the first one being by his own doing, the no contest against Cody Brundage, and then his fight in the spring with Josh Friend falling through. He brought a lot of that angry emotion and energy into his approach with Cesar Almeida. But we also mentioned last week that Cesar Almeida has some of the slickest kickboxing in the world. He does have a victory over Alex Poatan Pereira once upon a time in the kickboxing ring. No matter how much power you possess with 4-ounce gloves, somebody who has those sort of chops in the striking specific realm is not to be trifled with. As we saw, I mean, hey, I'll give the respect to Razak. Razak was certainly unloading and he was throwing big bombs at Cesar. He even had Cesar a little rocked at one point. But that counter left hand stiffened him like a board. He was frozen like Elsa, as Israel Adesanya would say. Full fenced response. I mean, again, the counter left hook that landed to Abdul Razak, as soon as it hit his jaw, he basically immediately, I mean, it was, when you throw water out, the videos that you see of someone in sub-zero temperatures throwing a cup of water and it just is instantly stiff and just boom. That was what happened to Abdul Razak. It was when you watched Looney Tunes back in the day when they got conked and they just turned stiff and just boom, 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 fell. And I don't say that to try to be disrespectful by any means, but the very first card of the year in 2025, we already have an early favorite for KO of the year in 2025, surely from the way that that played out. In the next fight, you had a war between Chris Curtis and Roman Kopylov. I mean, early on, Chris Curtis was having a lot of success. You had Russian Chase Hooper looking like a bloody mess. But Russian Chase Hooper is a dog. Roman Kopylov was able to weather the storm of Chris Curtis and ultimately able to finish the fight with only a couple of seconds left on the clock. I know that Chris Curtis was not happy about the way that the fight ended up being finished, or with it being called a finish versus it just expiring. Hey, if the fight goes another couple of seconds and expires all the way to the third round, it leaves something. I believe I understand where Chris Curtis's frustration comes from, because you had a very competitive first and second round. If it goes all the way to the third round, or if it goes all the way to the cards, I can understand him saying, hey, like, give me a chance there at that point. But also, to be fair, in just recognizing maybe where Mark Smith's judgment came into play. The kick that set up that finishing sequence where the fight ended up being called off was full shin to chin from Kopylov to Chris Curtis. Chris Curtis is hurt, goes down. Kopylov walks off basically in highlight style fashion. Mark Smith did get a little, in my opinion, he got happy feet. He saw that, okay, well, Curtis is down. Kopilov's kind of walking off. I don't know what to do. Well, I'm going to stop the fight. But as mentioned with the Ponzinibbio situation when he got hurt, yes, Chris Curtis was rocked and he went down and he was compromised severely, but he was still looking toward Roman Kopylov, and you could make the case that he was still there enough to let those last couple of seconds expire, that it didn't need to be called off. And I understand where he's arguing to give him the chance to let that fight go out, or, hey, you have to finish me completely. I was still here. Let me go out on my shield. I still had life in me. I get the argument from Chris Curtis. He said he doesn't know, especially at this age, what the future holds for him. Does he stay at 85? Does he try to make the descent down to 170? Not entirely sure. But one way or the other, we know that Chris Curtis, he is going to give you absolutely everything that he has when he goes out there and he fights. And whatever the decision is, I'm sure that there's going to be some exciting matchups on the horizon for him. You had Austin Bashi, one of the highly touted prospects, making his UFC debut against Christian C. Rod Rodriguez. C. Rod is the hype killer. He was able to come in and he took the wind out of the sails initially from Raul Rosas Jr., from Cameron Simon, from Isaac Dolgarian, and now Austin Bashi is another undefeated prospect or someone who was hot on that rise. He was able to best in that way. Christian is legit as far as his skill set goes. I think that he will continue to need to round some of these things out when it comes to fighting some of the vets, because there are some nervous energy aspects of some of the fighters that he's gone against. There are some aspects where him being a vet with having just more time in the saddle is what's allowed him to prevail in the long term of the contest. We did see him in a test against a veteran like Julian Erosa fall short, but again, another victory here. Who knows? One way or the other, Christian Rodriguez is continuing to pick up victories in the UFC. And then now at this stage, he's now on his second going to potentially third contract at this point, depending on where the renegotiation point came from. And he's making money. So if I'm him, I'm saying, well, hey, if you want to just keep on feeding me these early 20s debutante guys, I'm cool with it. Let me keep on clocking this grip and we'll keep moving it forward. Opening up the card, I hope that you kept your eyes on this one because it lasted all of 30 some seconds, and all of the jokes that went along with it, you could totally imagine. Puna Soriano, we talked about last week, has such that warrior spirit. Was at middleweight, goes down to welterweight now, took on Uros Medic. Big knockout victory to start in the first round. Incredible energy. And he always does something crazy, especially in his post fights. He did the whole sort of look. And of course, with that, the internet and the memes, they did not disappoint. The internet stays absolutely undefeated. And then also in lieu of his celebration, it kind of went along with his post-fight press conference where they said, "Hey, is this a record for you? Your fastest finish in, blah, 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 30 seconds, whatever." He said, "Well, actually, my fastest finish was 10 seconds, but it didn't happen in a cage." So, I mean, you just gotta love someone who in that moment is able to laugh at themselves and be able, I mean, they just got done doing one of the most primally aggressive and ferocious things possible to then be able to poke jokes and have fun. You gotta love it. A couple of fights on the prelims to talk about before we get into the preview for this week's pay-per-view card. You had a quick finish for Jose Johnson gets finished early on in that fight. You had a matchup with Thiago Moises taking on Trey Ogden. Thiago Moises is one of those guys who, again, we talked about on any given night is as tough as they come at 155 pounds. You do have to feel for Trey Ogden. Sometime in that second round, he ruptured his bicep tendon, and you could see it in between the second and the third round. There was just a little mass balled up toward his the top of his arm in that sense. And then afterwards, he confirmed it when they were standing there waiting for the final decision. He's poking at it saying, "For my bicep." So that's unfortunately going to be a bit of a time on the shelf for Trey Ogden, the head coach and owner of Marathon MMA out there in Overland, Kansas, which all the way around, that sucks for him as a fighter, sucks for him as a coach, sucks for his students and everyone who is underneath that umbrella, because him being healthy is kind of how, and for any coach, gym owner, so on and so forth, the wheels moving for the business are kind of predicated on you being healthy. So hopefully it's a speedy recovery and it isn't an intense surgery or anything of that sort for Trey Ogden in that respect. Jacoby Smith announced his presence with authority, comes in with a massive knockout to basically just say, "Hey, I'm here." He shouted out or called out more, if you will, Bilal Muhammad. He's not ready for Bilal yet, but Jacoby Smith, the Oklahoma State wrestling product, he is going to be a problem. Mark my words. I'm telling you right now, January 14th, 2025, there will be a day here in the near future where Jacoby Smith is in the rankings and, dare I say, potentially pushing toward being a contender at 170 pounds. As mentioned coming into the year, I think that this is going to be a year where 170 kind of rises as one of the dark horse divisions, as one of the tops in the game. There are so many rising prospects who are just oozing with talent, like your Jack Della Madalinas, Carlos Prates, Miguel Morales, those sorts, Ian Gary, obviously. Then you have Shavkat out there waiting for that title shot. There is so much talent. I mean, throw him in there. Buckley. There is so many guys who are on the precipice of just true greatness at 170. And I think that within due time, Jacoby Smith is going to be entered into that equation. One last one to talk about here before we head off into the next segment. You had Fatima Klein going out there and picking up a big finish against Victoria Dudikova. Fatima Klein has been someone who has been touted as a potential champion in the UFC coming out of the CFFC in that East Coast region. He is main training partners with Erin Blanchfield, who is someone who, ever since she entered the UFC, has been thought of as a future contender or a future champion at 125 pounds. They fight in different weight classes because they say basically they want to have the DC Kane effect. They're best friends and training partners. They don't want to fight in the same weight class because they don't want to be on the path to eventually have to fight each other. So they would rather be champions in two weight classes than just a single one. Moving along from that, though, folks, is there anything that you thought was a standout that we didn't cover from the weekend, or that you maybe thought was worthy of a mention here? Let us know on social media. That's me, Jordan Kurtz, at Comments from the Peanut Gallery, or hit us up at Mile High Sports online. But now, folks, we're going to get into this week's UFC 311 preview. This is going to be the first pay-per-view card of the year. This is going to be a matchup where you see a couple of title fights. You see potentially a title eliminator fight, another couple of ranked matchups, and just flat out some fun fights. And certainly all within that mix, personalities galore. We'll take it from the top down. In the main event, you have a rematch between Islam Makhachev taking on Arman Tsarukyan. Islam Makhachev, it's hard for anybody or it will be hard for anybody, I think, in some senses, and especially, maybe the casuals or the masses, to accept or to put Islam above Khabib. Skill for skill, I think Islam is a better fighter. Now, I don't know if anybody will match kind of that dominance that Khabib had, that 29-0 with the grit that he did. Yes, I accept all of the criticisms to the side of Khabib that he didn't have the tenure, he didn't have the amount of title defenses, so on and so forth. I get all that, which is why I don't ever put him at the top of the GOAT list. But I will offer that of his prime run, it's kind of like the Shaq argument, right, in basketball. Is Shaq the greatest basketball player of all time? No. But was there ever anybody more dominant at what he did during that prime run of those few years? Hard to say that there's anybody that's ever been more physically dominant and controlling and could just completely change the math on the board than what he did. Call it Gronk, whatever you may from different sports, but name those complete changers of the world. Islam doesn't get that nod, and I think that some of it just maybe circles back to the fact that, yes, Islam had had a USADA situation early on, as well as we've seen Islam lose. We never saw Khabib lose. But again, skill for skill, he's a more fluid striker. He's a better jiu-jitsu player. He works better in more positions than Khabib did. But all the way around, I think that you say he's more complete. And I just hope that eventually Islam can actually get his recognition there. And you're going to see him with a hungry dog in Arman Tsarukyan. Arman Tsarukyan has faced tough test after tough test along the way. He's beat guys who, one of them being on this card, and Beneil Dariush went out there and starched him within 40 seconds. His last fight at UFC 300 against Charles Oliveira, he picks up the victory there. He lost to Islam the first time. I think that they are both much different fighters now at this stage than they were before. But I still don't know that Arman has what it takes to usurp Islam. What I will offer to you, especially because I know some of you are a little bit froggy to go out there and throw your money on some lines. If Islam is to fall to Arman, it will be because the same situation where he lost. It's only because he gets clipped. What I can say for Arman Tsarukyan is he is explosive. He is explosive. He does hit hard. I don't know that that's necessarily something that bodes well when you're playing the probabilities, but if you find the right odds that you shop across your books for an Arman knockout, might be worth taking a flyer on. And I also think that the later that the fight goes, the higher the probability that that is going to be an Islam Makhachev lock. In the co-main event, you have a matchup between Merab Dvalishvili in his first title defense, taking on Umar Nurmagomedov. Umar comes into the fight at 18-0. Another part of that heralded Nurmagomedov tree, originally created by the Eagle himself, Abdulmanap Nurmagomedov. This is a part of father's plan, if you will, that they're going to have another champion within the family. He's going to have his hands full with Merab Dvalishvili. I think that Umar is a very talented fighter. Do I think that Umar was potentially fast-tracked toward this title shot? You could argue that. I do think that he also should be respected and should be given all of the props that he deserves because he beat Corey Sandhagen, who I believe is one of the absolute best in the world and one of the generational best for the bantamweight division. All of that being said, Merab is a machine, as his nickname suggests. And I don't think that Merab is going to be that willing to just go out there and give up his title. Merab, I believe, will be able to have the gas tank to be able to match anything that Umar puts in front of him. Wrestling for wrestling, you could probably make the argument that Umar has a better true wrestling skill set, but MMA wrestling, I don't know. That's what we're going to have to be able to see because Merab is a very good MMA wrestler. And MMA wrestling is vastly different than pure wrestling, especially once you can start to add in the strikes and call it for what it is. Merab is funky. He's awkward. Where he throws strikes from isn't orthodox a lot of times, and he's very hard to prepare for because he throws things at unorthodox angles, because he's able to change his levels and his paces at what it is. He's a very hard guy to mimic and to replicate in the training room. Obviously, the Eagle camp is going to be as well prepared as you could possibly be. But again, something about that championship confidence that somebody like a Merab gains, who was already as confident as it gets. But then now that he has the belt behind him, I would like to think that this fight favors Merab personally. All that being said, Umar might go out there and blank him. Who knows? If Umar is that much better of a wrestler who can be able to stop the grappling and stop the takedowns and keep Rob basically held down at a level that we really haven't necessarily seen, or is able to catch him in a submission. I don't know. Because I don't think that Umar has the striking to be able to put Marab out, but I might be wrong. That might be something that we come back next week, what I got right, what I got wrong, and you could say, oh, well, Marab went out there and got sparked by Umar Nurmagomedov. But if that happens, I will be the first one to tell you that I would be extremely surprised to see it. I think that this is an and still affair. One of the fights on the card that to me has some of the biggest appeal is going to be in that feature fight slot. You have a matchup between two top 3 ranked 205 pounders, and they're as polar opposites as you could possibly be when it comes to the personality spectrum. You have the warrior type in true martial artist of Yuri Prohaska coming into the contest at number 2, the former champion, taking on also former champion Jamal Sweet Dreams Hill at number 3. Jamal on the much more boisterous end of things. Jamal, well, he might have won the Salty Dog of the Year award in 2024. Jamal Hill made headlines for all of the wrong reasons last year. As a whole, until the way that he handled things with the defeat with Alex Pereira, I've always liked Jamal. I just think that he handled that poorly and has continued to handle the fallout of that loss very poorly. But then on the flip side, you have somebody like Yuri Prohaska, who one time after a loss, he goes and he sits in a dark like box, basically hibernating for 3 days, like fasting and exploring the dark demons of his mind to figure out what went wrong. Like, again, we're talking two very different ends of the spectrum here. One who calls Vegas home for the most part, does a lot of his training out of the PI, state of the art technology. The other guy has a cabin in the woods where his punching bag is a little leather pad that is tied to a tree. Total different ends of methodology here. But again, somebody like Yuri Prohaska, he is so in tune with himself. I mean, I can say it personally. When I was there in Vegas for UFC 300, the dude was walking around T-Mobile Arena in the middle of the night by himself, just basically just like channeling energy. And then he goes out there and picks up a massive victory against Alexander Rakic that night. Just a different breed. He's a strange bird. He's got some tism, but that man can fight for sure. That is a warrior's warrior. And in this fight against Jamal Hill, hey, Yuri gets hit. Yuri is somebody who is able to be touched, and Jamal has some of the most level 10 FU power that the division has to offer. But on the flip side, I believe that the volume that Yuri is able to present, and again, talking about being awkward and unorthodox, the way that he kind of switches his stances, creates angles, dips, bends, finds his entries, is something that you really can't prepare for. So I'm interested to see how Jamal Hill is going to be able to solve that equation, especially when it comes to somebody who is as unorthodox as Yuri Prohaska is. You have a clacker of a matchup in the lightweight division between number 9 ranked Beneil Dariush taking on Renato Money Moicano. Who doesn't want to see a Money Moicano post-fight promo? I mean, I know that the people at Disney and ESPN are certainly glad that he's not on a fight night card, that he will be on or that he's not on the prelims, that they have him on the pay-per-view portion, because they're not going to have to spend half the time bleeping or editing it out. But ever since he had that victory a couple of years ago at Madison Square Garden, the personality, the persona of Money Moicano has became one of the most electric things in all of mixed martial arts. His Show Me the Money pod, the end of year for 2024 clips, you could just watch Best of Money Moicano. If you go look that up on Instagram or on YouTube, Best of Money Moicano on the Show Me the Money pod, you'll sit there and you will laugh from pillar to post the entire time. He's an electric personality. It's not anything against Benil Dariush because he is, on the flip side, he is as humble and as sweet and as much of a nice guy as you could imagine. And I don't mean to say it to disrespect Benny or to wish defeat on him or anything, but I think I can speak for a large portion of the fan base, and we want to see a Moni Moicano promo. We want to see what he's going to get on the mic and say. I mean, after he went out there and he upset Benoit Saint-Denis in France, beat the hell out of the Frenchman in front of his countrymen, and cuts a promo saying, F Macron, and goes on his full economic rant. He's actually a fairly intelligent guy. He's not just chatting again just to tell you some flabbergasted air full of BS when he cuts his promos. He's telling you things of certain substance and his beliefs, and he wants to go and after he's done fighting be a part of the SWAT team because he wants to tackle the crime problem here. He was talking about economics in France because of the situation that they were there, and he gave you books to read or things to be able to go study in the process. He's not your regular person cutting promos out there, and the fact that he has such a crazy accent in the process makes it all the more entertaining. Moving along from that fight, opening up the main card, you have Kevin Holland taking on Reiner de Ritter, RDR, the former 2 Division 1 championship title holder, taking on the Trailblazer Big Mouth himself. I love this fight. I think that this is a fun matchup between a couple of guys who have contrasting styles. Kevin Holland is certainly going to want to keep this on the feet. He's going to want to try to piece him up and get the knockout. Whereas de Ritter, we know that he's going to want to grapple you. We know that he's going to try to take it to the canvas. He's going to try to get the submission. Yes, Kevin Holland is a Travis Lutter black belt, but at the same time, if there is a route to victory for de Ritter that is the strongest, it is going to be the grappling. If there's a much larger advantage for Kevin Holland, it is using his Kung Fu black belt on the flip side. It is using his striking. It is being that guy who rose meteorically through that 2020 run that he had. He needs to find a way to finish de Ritter on the feet. Don't let this get tied up. A couple of fights to talk about on the prelims. Moving along here, we have a matchup between what I believe is one of the top prospects in the bantamweight division, the 9-0 Peyton Talbot, taking on Howdy Barcelos. Howdy Barcelos, one of the fixtures of the bantamweight division for quite some time, was in the rankings for a couple of years, is now outside of the rankings, but still one of those guys who tried and true has fought some of the tops of the top. One of those being Umar Nurmagomedov. That was kind of the fight that sprung Umar into contention, was his victory over Barcelos. So that being said, they've used him as kind of that gatekeeper or the litmus test, if you will, for some of these rising prospects. All of that to be said, I don't think he has what it takes to be able to stop Peyton Talbot in this fight. I think that what we've seen from Peyton Talbot in his last couple of outings is just the tip of the iceberg. This man is barely in his mid-20s at this stage and far from his final form. The evolution of his game on the feet is improving every single fight. He has power from both sides. He can switch his hips very fluidly. Might be some other reasons why he does things well with his hips, but that's a completely different discussion. That all to be said, Peyton Talbot is a very talented fighter, and I think that this is going to be one of those kids who, by the time that 2025 is all said and done, he's knocking on the rankings door and potentially, maybe with the carefully curated matchups, pushing toward 12 to 10, maybe. I don't know. Bantamweight is a very stacked division, but he's a kid who you can certainly be sure that with a big win, he will continue to get a big push from the promotion, as he's already started to get, and especially because he is, for lack of a better term to not get me in trouble here, a nuanced individual. Between the dresses and the nail painting and all of those things, he's nuanced. We'll just call it that. He gets in with a lot of the LA crowd, if you will. But we're going to move along from that. You have a matchup between a couple of top 10 heavyweights. You have Jailton Almeida taking on the polar bear Sergey Spivak. This is a fight where you have a couple of very grapple heavy heavyweights, but this is something where, you know, a couple of the more athletic guys in that division at this stage, there is ground to be made potentially toward the tops of that division. There is a couple of those who are, as we've talked about through times in the heavyweight division, kind of jobbers who are in the mix, but Spivak has had some very highlight reel worthy moments, and he's had some times where he's been inconsistent. Jailton Almeida being a guy who we've seen very strong moments, but a knock would be maybe to say lacking a killer instinct to go for the throat when finishes are imminent. How does that match up here when you have someone who stylistically might be able to go toe to toe with him grappling? I don't know. I mean, I'm a grappling nerd in my own right. So when it is a strategic matchup and a couple of guys who do actually have some tactical strategy or tactics within their, or skills, I should say, within their arsenal, I'm in for it, even if it's heavyweight. Let's see what they can do. You have former, I should say, LFA champion, just got signed on short notice, Osmat Bakoyev, who got a big knockout here in Colorado just a couple of months ago. He is signed on short notice to fight Zachary Reese. Zachary Reese was scheduled originally to fight our favorite Danny, our favorite whipping boy. He fell off, so we don't have the chance to go and give him a little bit more. Oh, Cedriquez, dumbass. He didn't make this card this week, so he fell off the card here, Cedriquez. We'll have the chance to come back at you another time. But Zach Reese has in my opinion, a much tougher fight with Osmat Bakoyev. I mean, I think that Reese probably would have gotten through Cedriquez fairly easily. I don't think that that's the case with Bakoyev. Bakoyev is a strong grappler all the way around, be it his jiu-jitsu or his grappling, and he does have one-shot knockout type of power. He comes from a strong camp out of ATT. The short notice, though, not sure how that's going to work out for him. Zach Reese preparing this entire time, albeit somebody different dimensionally and stylistically. Cedric is a much taller and longer fighter who is much more of a, he's going to try to go for a knockout style of finish versus someone who's more well-rounded like Bakoyev is. But again, that's why you fight the fight. On the early prelims, you have 5 fights on the Fight Pass prelims, a couple of which have ranked fighters, and a couple, I mean, there's some who, hey, let's call it for what it is. They've grabbed some eyes and quite the following for some reasons that might not necessarily be related to fighting, but we'll tie them all together here. In this first matchup, you have Grant KGD Dawson taking on Carlos Diego Ferreira. That's a fight that you could throw on a main card of any card, and it's worthy of the caliber of the performances that these guys have put on throughout the course of their career. Yeah, Grant doesn't have a number by his name anymore, but just a quick turn of the sun ago, he was a guy who was potentially being fast-tracked into that discussion toward the top 10, top 5s also, be it before he took that loss to Bobby Green. That all coming around, you have Diego Ferreira on the flip side of things, who another tried and true veteran coming into the contest at 19-5. This is a, here you go, fans. This is worth it for you. And maybe this is a way that they draw some eyes toward Fight Pass. I don't know. Maybe get some more subscriptions. I really don't know the reasoning as to why this fight is this low on the bout sheet, but this is two very skilled and high-level veterans that you are getting to see on the early prelims, ladies and gentlemen. Following that, you have a ranked matchup between Caro Hosa taking on Ailin Fiona Perez. Now, Ailin Perez, she's probably more known in most of the circles as the Twerker. That's, if you go and say like, oh, to the common person out there, do you know who Ailin Perez is? No, they probably don't. But you say, oh, you know that girl who twerks? Yeah, they probably recognize that more than anything. Well, she's back in action this week, and she just happens to be sharing the card with Merab Dvalishvili, who probably one of my favorite clips of all of 2024 was after Merab won the belt and she's backstage and she's in a video, she's cutting her own little video for her socials and her pages, with the champion, and she's twerking next to Merab with the belt. And then Merab just says, "Can I touch?" And Merab gives it a little spank in the process. Like, you gotta love it. Again, Merab, you can say whatever you want that he is not an entertaining fighter. Merab is an entertaining person, plain and simple. Merab also had, dare I say, one of the best press conference moments of all of 2024 with the jacuzzi line. Like, yes, I recognize that Umar was not in the photo of the jacuzzi with all of the Eagle clan, but the timing of that was pure comedy. To right then and there in that moment to say, "How about jacuzzi?" The pop of the crowd reaction and just the image that conjured up in everybody's mind. It's one of those that as soon as he said it, it was a hit. You knew it. I mean, when you get that big of a crowd pop, and as soon as he said, even in his accent and somewhat broken English in that way, whenever he said jacuzzi, everybody knew exactly the photo that he was speaking to in relation to the Nurmagomedov clan. Another quick couple of matchups to speak about here. He didn't have his way in the last fight, but I'm a Ricky Tercios guy. You've got to believe in yourself. The way that Ricky Tercios has prevailed throughout the regional scene, then getting onto the Ultimate Fighter, winning early on, cutting a couple of promos. You got to love the guy because he's not the most physically talented guy in the world by any means, but he is someone who has made it to the top level of competition in the sport with all grit and hard work, all dedication, and someone who just never stopped. Physically, again, he's not the fastest, he's not the strongest, doesn't have the most booming power, isn't some sort of suffocating grappler who will just drain the life out of his opponents or have some sort of constrictor like squeezes to his chokes that are Hamzat Chimaev like, that pop the blood vessels in his opponent's eyes or crack the teeth right out of their jaws. He doesn't have any of those things, yet he has still been able to make it to the UFC and won in the UFC, and it's by pure grit and determination, and you have to respect somebody like a Ricky Tercios in that respect. Got a tough test on his hand facing Bernardo Sapai. One last matchup opening up the whole card. You have a ranked flyweight in number 11, Tagir Ulanbekov, taking on Clayton Carpenter. Tagir is a very talented fighter, but he's one who comes from that same Nurmagomedov clan. Hopefully this is a chance for people to get to know him, but him being the very first fight on the card won't be a lot of eyes. Him being a ranked guy and potentially someone who is a contender at 125 pounds, they need to start doing some things to build this kid if he's going to be in that mix. Otherwise, you're going to have someone who is just another Ankalaev, if you will, someone who is in the mix, but you don't want him to be a champion because nobody knows who he is. And there's all of the, again, all the reasons to start building this kid. But that wraps up our UFC talk. Any hotlines out there? Anybody that you think that is going to be worthy of throwing a little builder? Let us know. We'll be happy to share that out to the people out there. Let us know on social media. That's me, Jordan Kurtz, at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. We're going to talk through a couple of the cards this weekend going down on the local side of things. As mentioned, you have Sparta Sports and Entertainment coming through with 2 fight nights this weekend. Friday night being a striker's delight with 16 scheduled bouts in the squared circle. Want to give a shout out to True Soja Soto and the co-main event. Figueroa kid's on the card. He's always fun to watch. Isaiah Wright is fighting Muay Thai here. You have the Summit County Sasquatch with the 4-finger death punch. That is the one, the only Parker Ford boxing on the card. Moreover, we're going to talk more with the MMA side of things, the caged violence card, if you will. And it's only because we're running down on time a little bit here, and also because naturally with MMA being our bread and butter, that's where we have a lot more familiarity here. In the main event, it's a pro scrap in the super flyweight division between Aaron Beltran taking on J Ponder. Aaron can wrestle his ass off. He's got a collegiate wrestling background, wrestled his entire life. He can melt his opponents away with the way that he's a grinder and the pressure and the ground and pound, the relentless shoot, strike, shoot, strike, shoot, strike that he's able to put into play. J-Po's probably going to look for something up the middle. I would imagine that it's not a matter of if, but when Aaron shoots and when he does, you could potentially look for something along the lines of a knee coming from J-Po. But I'm sure that's something that Aaron has prepared for throughout the course of this camp. If Ponder can't keep Beltran off of him, it's going to be a tough night. If he's able to keep him at range, well, he's a long, lengthy striker who can throw at volume, who might be a problem for Aaron. But again, when you have a, dare I say, for lack of more reference and context, roughly a 20-year gap in wrestling, it's hard to overcome. It's a very stiff disadvantage to be able to overcome on that side when you have someone who can wrestle the way that they do, who has so many different entries to be able to get the fight down to the canvas where it works better for them, or even just working off of the fence and then working down to the cage. Also, want to give a shout out to Beltran's Grill, some of the best tacos around here in the Denver area. I believe they're off of like 120th, so a little bit north, but check them out. Phenomenal tacos. I don't drink, but I know that they've got award-winning margaritas over there. So I just, again, Aaron being a business owner, somebody who is in this fight community, want to make sure that we support them in all fronts possible. They've helped us out with a couple of our shows, and have their food truck has been the food provider at some of our shows. So we thank you for Beltran's Grill supporting the combat sports community. We also want to show some love to you back there. In the co-main event, you have a 185 title fight between Xavier Vasquez and Jamel Davis. The feature bout, this is really a clacker, ladies and gentlemen. You have a flyweight title fight between challenger Frank St. Peter out of Pueblo taking on the champ out of New Mexico, the 505 product being Sergio Gutierrez. Sergio Gutierrez is lightning quick. I mean, you want to talk about a kid who has some serious potential in the game. The Matt Rat his entire life. His older brother is a pro fighter, Hondo Gutierrez, who I think very highly of. This kid's right hand is as fast as it gets. And if he has the opportunity to start unflowing or unloading his hands and flowing combinations with the punches and bunches, eventually an overhand right is going to find its mark, or the right hand in some capacity. And the pop that he has, again, at 125 pounds, is not what you see with a lot of guys. So I'm looking forward to seeing what this title defense is from Sergio Gutierrez as he takes on St. Peter, because St. Peter, I mean, anybody who's coming out of Pueblo, you're a scrappy kid. That Warrior camp right now is firing on all cylinders. They've had a pretty good run so far with some momentum trending in the forward direction for them. They're going to be looking to put out a strong title challenge there. You have Brandon Waters, the strong prospect out of Genesis, taking on Josh Dickhausen out of Trials. Ellery Cleveland is on the card. The ultra-talented former Team USA Muay Thai specialist in David Serrano, he's back in the MMA cage, taking on Jordan Miles. A couple of long, lanky 155-pounders. Jordan Miles has had some one-hitter-quitter knockouts in his resume. David Serrano, only a couple of fights on the MMA side of things, but in Muay Thai has a lengthy resume, and I'm interested to see how the game continues to unfold for David, especially as his career unfolds with mixing everything together in the process. A couple of other fights on the card to give a shout out to. You have the young savage in Owen Schultz. This kid has such a bright future. He comes under the Corey Sandhagen tutelage. That entire camp of which we've spoken to on a couple of different occasions. We've had friend of the program, Elias Rodriguez. I don't know if they're roommates, but I know that they're really tight. They're good friends. They've been in each other's corner. You know, they all fight very similarly. This kid is an explosive striker who has more kickboxing experience than what his MMA record reflects. But I believe that you're going to see an exciting performance and an effort coming out there from Owen Schultz. I'm very high on that camp between him, Connor Owens to Elias Rodriguez. Those guys are, Luis Guerrero, all of those guys, they're young savages. They're young savages on the rise, and that's a crew who is going to be a force to be reckoned with as time goes forward. And rounding it out, want to give a shout out to Kyra Dial. She's making her MMA debut. Listen, I'm excited for this one. And it's on the personal side of things. I've known Kyra for years. I've thought that she's had the potential to pursue MMA for quite some time. It's just always been a matter of when did Kyra want to commit to the process and dial in to get herself ready for that opportunity. Well, those things have now met the time, or that rubber has met the road. She's been competing consistently on the submission grappling side of things, has been in the gym all the time, regularly putting in work over there at Genesis. And now she makes her MMA debut this weekend. So shout out to you, Kyra. Looking forward to you going out there and giving it everything that you have. You know, whether it's something for any of these debutantes that goes favorably or not, it's a respectable experience that you're going out there and you're putting yourself through and throwing your name in the fire to be the man or the woman in the arena. Rounding things off here before we go to 3 rounds, just want to say thank you to everybody out there following us along. Real quick, want to give a shout out to the Guardian Project out there. For those who don't know, the Guardian Project is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that's committed to providing free youth jiu-jitsu scholarships to the underserved youth around the world. Guardian is a project that aims to provide stability for at-risk youth. By doing so, you help keep them off the streets, help give them a little bit of direction and some discipline in their lives. There's about roughly 400 kids around the world that are being served from the Guardian program. You can check out factoryxmuaythai.com to make those tax-deductible donations to help support a student within our community today. Now, closing things out here to go 3 rounds, I got my man, Danny Bailey, behind the boards. First time of the year for us here in 2025. What do we got, my friend?
All right, round 1. The Fat Lady is singing for Bellator in 2025 as it was announced that Bellator operations will end this year with more changes coming to the PFL side of the business. Are you surprised?
I'm really not surprised. I mean, the writing has kind of been on the wall that they're not doing well financially on ever since this merger. Bellator was in the dumps. I mean, we've spoken at it before, but 30,000-foot view to give you context, there was no cash value to Bellator. They sold essentially for stock options. That was something that they were able to get off the books at previous company. They then get absorbed in this merger with PFL. A large majority of those fighters were then either released or asked to restructure their contracts from the Bellator side of things. Some of the biggest names out there that are not in the UFC were essentially dormant over the last year because of this, that were on the Bellator side of things. And we're going to share the reflection from the face of Bellator, essentially, longtime champion and Patricio Pitbull. But he echoes the sentiment of what a lot of those Bellator fighters are. I just believe that he's one of the best mouthpieces to share simply because of his what his standing was within the organization. Patricio Pitbull says the self-called co-leader in MMA and Fighters First organization is cutting a bunch of fighters and forcing others to take pay cuts of up to 70%. No respect for the fighter contracts or what they've accomplished. The self-called Fighters First organization is also changing its contracts, so it's almost impossible for fighters to be free agents and to leave on free agency, also tying down fighters' payments for many years and taking away all of their leverage. This self-called co-leader in MMA is ghosting some fighters and their managers, leaving them with no answers while the owner makes silly and disrespectful posts on social media. Pew, pew, pew. Shots fired all across the board there from Patricio Pitbull. It is a sad thing that Bellator has gone by the wayside and they have met the reaper, because competition is good for everybody across the board in business. And, as we talked about last week, this has got to be hard for Hunter Campbell as the UFC's lead legal counsel to present a defense in some of these lawsuits or the antitrust or any of this, that they have formidable competition. Because you have doofuses running these other organizations that have essentially ran them into the ground. The answer is at this stage, nobody can go toe to toe with the UFC. You can't go and do those sorts of things because it's not feasible to be able to it's not feasible to be able to do so or to think that you're going to compete on that level. You have to try to have some sort of homegrown element, and it's not by doing what these other organizations have done. You already know that signs of things not going well for PFL are that the PFL, well, they had their $1 million prizes, right? Well, those are no longer $1 million prizes. Those all shrunk by 50%. They're now $500,000 prizes. That's a sign that it's not going very well. So you start reading between the lines here. We said it last week. I don't know that 2025 is the year that PFL also folds, but this might be a year where we really start to see things unravel for that organization.
Former UFC champion Holly Holm requested her release from the roster, and the UFC granted the Hall of Famer the opportunity to pursue other ventures. What do you think of the move?
I'm not surprised, and to be fair, I'm glad. Hey, I think it sounds like it's a mutually beneficial move in that respect. The UFC, they've gotten all of the best that they can out of Holly. And I that sounds kind of, I guess, insensitive, but when we're talking about it from a business point of things, if we're looking at it from the organization side of things, well, they got everything that they can out of that set of tires, for lack of a better reference. I mean, it just is what it is. At this stage of the game, and she had a couple of fights left on her deal, and as much as I love me, the preacher's daughter, she's now 43 years old, and she's coming off of what were in the cage back-to-back losses. Technically, she's 0-1-1 in those outings, with Mayra Bueno Silva's win being overturned to a no contest. But there's not really a path back to the title for her. She would have to win multiple fights in order to be considered in contender waters again, which then brings back the last loss to who is basically the heir apparent, who she was mauled by, in Kayla Harrison. Even if Holly went on some sort of crazy run, I don't see a fight with Kayla where it's not exactly the same outcome as it was at UFC 300 back in April. All of that to be said, if she can go get a bag in boxing or some other show based off of her existing body work and resume, then please, by all means, let that be a reality. Go out there and get paid. If you still want to fight, you still want to compete, and there's the offer for you to go out there and do so, why not go out there and maximize as much money as you possibly can while you still have a little bit of life left in the tank there? But to circle that back, she was no longer going to be in that title discussion. So I can totally respect her saying, I don't want to be your gatekeeper. I don't want to be the person who you're just throwing in here with all of these menacing prospects to go and build their name off of me. I want to go and do some things for me to where I'm the A side. I can go make some money in the process. Respect it.
Retired UFC champion Khabib Nurmagomedov went viral this week after being escorted off of an airplane. What were your thoughts on that whole situation, Jordan?
I think he was definitely profiled personally. I mean, I know that as the story went back and forth that they weren't comfortable with his accent and him saying yes, or they didn't think that he answered the question in the way. I mean, but my only we haven't had any sort of reason to ever believe that Habib would be publicly disrespectful or non-compliant to figures of authority or even just employees and workers of an establishment. We have no history out there that tells us that this is the case or that this is something that is of character for him to do. Honestly, quite the contrary. Habib has always been known to be one of the very respectful and, follow orders, like respect the establishment. This is what they were told. Even if you don't like it, you respect the rules because that's what the rules are. That's kind of what we've always known for Khabib. We don't see what the initial interaction was. That part wasn't on film. We saw the second part where they're asking him to go off. But kind of the question, though, that I ask from this is the airline, and we'll talk about the airline statement, which was Frontier, which that also brings about a couple of questions for me, which first off, why the hell is Khabib flying Frontier? I fly Frontier. What's the former champion of the world doing there? Khabib, are your tax problems that bad to where you're back flying economy over here in Frontier? If so, well, I'm with you, brother. I'm unhappy with being nickel and dime with baggage charges or seat claims for everything with Frontier also. And I don't know why, I guess, with Frontier, why was that such an issue of them coming and bugging him about the exit row on the flight itself when with Frontier, you have to choose your seat. I guarantee you that in an exit row for a Frontier flight where you pay to choose your seats and have the extra leg room, they picked those because it was all of him and his crew in the row. I guarantee you that they all picked those seats together. When you choose that within a Frontier point of sale app, you acknowledge what comes along with being in an exit row. So what shouldn't that have been enough consent to not have this whole entire song and dance? And furthermore, wouldn't you want to have Khabib of most all people available to be that person who is in the exit row? One of the most physically, again, as we spoke to earlier in the show, dominant or capable athletes that we've seen of this generation. I digress. We will share the Frontier Airlines. Again, the airlines that my broke ass flies that somehow Khabib was still on. But this was a statement from Frontier Airlines. On January 11th, 2025, as Flight 4401 from Las Vegas to San Francisco was preparing for departure, a flight attendant initiated the customary briefing for exit row passengers. Customer Khabib Nurmagomedov, who was seated in an exit row, was asked multiple times if he was willing and able to assist in the event of an emergency. According to the flight attendant, Mr. Nurmagomedov did not respond despite repeated attempts, which placed him in non-compliance with FAA requirements. The flight attendant informed Mr. Nurmagomedov that he could be moved to a different upgraded seat or exit the plane. They said then, quote, videos circulating on social media platforms do not capture this interaction and instead show a subsequent interaction after a gate agent entered the plane and reiterated the option to be reseated. As a result of the customer's initial unresponsiveness and repeated declinations of a seat change, he was asked to deplane per airline and FAA policy. The decision to deplane the customer was in no way related to his ethnicity, and we have refunded him and his traveling companions for their flights. So if he was wrong, but you refunded him, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of a... Would you have refunded him if you didn't find out that he's Khabib Nurmagomedov? He's former champion of the world? That he has all of this, clout or everything behind his name? Because in the video that was actually shown, it shows him responding and speaking back and forth. And like, it's like, you not comfortable with by accident or how like that was kind of what you gathered from it, was that it was more a little bit dicey in terms of that, but we didn't see the initial side. We didn't see the alleged unresponsiveness or declinations, if you will. You did see a response from his longtime foe in Nate Diaz, and Nate Diaz putting up a couple of very choice memes, if you will, toward the Nurmagomedov and the Dagestani clan, but him saying all you had to say was yes. But then you had Michael Chandler coming to the defense of Islam saying, or excuse me, to the defense of Khabib saying, how in any sort of way is this acceptable or was this right? And basically saying what I said, being a character witness on a public forum, if you will, for Khabib, saying that There's no way that this could have gone down the way that it was alleged to have gone down. What do you guys think, though? Do you think that this was out of line for the airlines? Do you think that Khabib was out of line? Let us know on social media. That puts a bow on it for the week, though. This is the MMA plug. I want to say thank you so much to all of you for tuning in each and every week for this original combat sports programming. Thank you to the Mile High Sports Network, especially my man Danny Bailey behind the boards for us. We have those couple of shows going down at the Eclipse Event Center this weekend for Sparta Sports and Entertainment. Go give them some love and check them out on the local scene. UFC 311 going down this weekend. Pay-per-view going to be kicking off at 8 p.m. Stick around for our program next week. Same time, same place, though. I'm Jordan Kurtz. Give me a follow along online at Comments from the Peanut Gallery. This is the MMA plug on Mile High Sports.